NADTC webinar on procuring. Hi everyone, and welcome to the National Aging and Disability Transportation Center webinar on Procuring Demand Responsive Transit Technology. I'm very excited that you could meet with us today. My name is Christy McLaughlin, and I work with the NADTC on providing the technology for these particular webinars. So just a few logistics before I turn the session over to our presenter today. We are recording the session, and so keep that in mind if you're entering any information into the chat box, because that will be public for everyone. If you are connected by both the phone and internet today, we do ask that you mute your computer speakers. If you haven't experienced it already, you will experience some feedback by having the audio come through both ways. If you're having any difficulty, if you're on the phone right now and having any difficulty connecting with Blackboard, you have a couple of options. You can email me, and I'll try to give you some assistance. And that email address is McLaughlin and McLaughlin@gmail.com. It's the same email that you received the connection information from. Or you can contact the Blackboard Technical Assistance Line, which is at 877-382-2293. You will be able to ask questions and comment during the session. You don't have to wait till the end. You can do it throughout. You have two ways that you can do that. You can either type your question into the chat section, which is the bottom left of your screen, or you can, again, email me. I'll be monitoring my email throughout the entire session, and I'll be able to present the questions to Steve as we go through or at the end of the session during the Q&A. We do have closed captioning. You can access that by going to the CC icon in your screen, or you can go to Control+F8 on your keyboard. Either way will allow you to access that information. So with that, I'm going to turn the session over to Steve, let him do a little introduction for himself, and then take over, and we'll talk about the topic of the day. Steve?
Thank you. I'm a consultant. I am a grants manager for NADTC and blogger, and you can see the blogs at nadtc.org. I've had 40 years in the business in both demand response and fixed route transit, working for local transit systems or agencies, developing, planning, overseeing, and evaluating demand response and fixed route service, including on the demand response side, both ADA and human service transportation. And this is a great time to be in the business because we are in a revolution. There's new companies every few weeks experimenting with first mile, last mile services, with human services. A new player actually is the Medicare Advantage insurance industry, who's finding it cheaper to pay for rides to make sure that people make their appointments and avoid wasting both physician time, therapist time, and time on MRI and other supportive technologies. So it's a great time to be in the business, but there's that revolution is based on technology. So that's why we're here. Why get technology? And I'm not going to read through these screens word for word. I have some commentary to go to it, but I did choose these three images because they're vital towards uniting disparate funding streams and disparate ride providers. So that's why I put in cost allocation, where you can have where you can schedule by geography and time, where riders can share use of a vehicle. We've got some great technology to know where your vehicles are all the time, as well as where they should be, and to reevaluate ETAs, estimated times of arrival. And a lot of systems now don't even need to print manifests. They can reassign rides real time between vehicles. And at some point, as we work towards mobility as a service, again, it's not just the platform, but you need a platform for information, booking, payment, reporting, and that's not all. So, but as you develop your vision of the technology that you want, it needs to be built on functional needs. And I've got to stress this. There's nobody better to help you assess your functional needs than your stakeholders, your riders, your employees, your project partners, including congregate work sites, dialysis, senior and adult daycare centers, and even suppliers, your insurance agent, your garage if your maintenance is outsourced. Rider surveys and discussions with user groups can highlight areas of dissatisfaction, and reservationists and drivers are your eyes and ears, and they'll have suggestions of their own. So I encourage you to periodically meet with your frequent destinations, such as your senior centers, dialysis centers, or work sites to assess concerns. Now, what are our technology options? Well, routing and scheduling, dispatch and voice data communications with vehicles, onboard video, and app-based booking, and where's my ride information. And remember that it's got to be accessible. Websites and apps must be certified as 508 compliant for web content accessibility. 508 refers to Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, as well as Section 255 of the Communications Act. And as you research this, you may want to look up the final rule issued by the U.S. Access Board, January 18, 2017, that updated the accessibility requirements for information and communications technology. You can also measure the accessibility of web-based technology, whether it's for desktops or smartphones, against the International Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The acronym is WCAG. And these were developed by the Web Accessibility Initiative. Communications must also be HIPAA compliant. HIPAA, of course, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996, HIPAA. These regulations protect the privacy and security of certain health information. HIPAA is the reason why we don't print dialysis center or cancer patient on paper manifests, because you never know who's looking in the window of the vehicle. HIPAA is the reason why electronic data transmissions must be secured through encryption and other security measures. So, periodically through this presentation, we'll have questions for you. And the first one is, what type of transportation do you provide? And 5 choices are provided. And please correct me if I'm wrong, Christy, but you basically pick A, B, C, D, or E. A being fixed route bus. Yes. That's correct. There's a polling feature participant box. So within the participant box, you'll see a little drop-down menu that currently has a lowercase a in it. If you click on that, you'll be able to select which one corresponds to the type of transit you provide. So again, A is fixed route, urban and suburban. D is fixed route, rural. C is demand response, urban, suburban, or suburban. D is demand response, rural. And E is both fixed route and demand response. Much of the technology and business practices used by fixed route and demand response is similar. While the scheduling challenges differ, both can be automated. Both offer software solutions to assign vehicles to fixed route or to group trips. And there are some systems that actually operate everything in-house, and a bus operator can be working demand response or fixed route, and their schedule may be mixed. So you can create driver schedules corresponding with your vehicle assignments and enable your drivers to pick their preferred weekly work schedules in order of seniority. You can do that with demand response just as you can do that with fixed route. Communications between dispatch and vehicles basically works the same, although demand response technology is likely to transmit more data than fixed route. So let's see. How do we see how the responses are coming in?
I will share it right now. There's only been a few responses, but I will publish them. The little box that's going to come up.
Okay.
Mostly D and E.
D and E, yep. Demand response and both, or both. If you have a communication system, and I guess this will register as more people punch in, if you have a communication system with your fixed route buses that offers a general transit feed specification, GTFS, data feed, app developers, such as a transit app, can upload that GTFS feed for people who are waiting for the bus. I found that in experience, it's easier on the transit system to produce the feed and let the app developers handle it than to try to update it for each app developer. That can be very labor intensive. Soon, demand response services will be able to offer a GTFS Flex feed for the same purpose. This is lots of experiments going on, especially in Vermont. Those apps will then be able to offer intermodal transfers. For example, to take dial-a-ride to the village transit center, then board the intercity bus to reach the regional medical center. Each stop, whether a fixed route bus stop or a demand response pickup or drop-off location, would be time-stamped with this with a global positioning system, GPS location. This GPS data is necessary for both apps and for reporting. Both fixed route and demand response can take advantage of onboard video technology, which is often triggered by G-force events, G meaning gravity, sudden stops, sudden acceleration, swerving. Onboard video is a security tool for false claims, as well as for investigations of claims, crashes, and it can be a great driver tool. So how do you find this needed technology? Intel. Attend trade shows at state and national transit association conferences. Note which features would be helpful. Ask your vendors for web-based demonstrations and for customer references. Visit those customers if you're able and ask whether they've achieved their objectives, the pitfalls they've come across during the implementation process, and their recommendations. Also, ask for their local definition of on-time performance and request recent OTP, that's my acronym for it, on-time performance data. If a project has been in use for a few years, you can also consult the National Transit Database for similar systems similar to yours to check their productivity, boardings per revenue hour, per revenue vehicle service hour, or per mile. If a product you're reviewing meets your needs and the performance is appealing, ask the customer for their procurement scope of services and the contractor's price sheet. You'll need both that scope and the price sheet. The procurement process can begin early, even before the vision for the new technology is finalized. You can issue a request for qualifications, RFQ, a request for expressions of interest, REOI, or both. An REOI is a tool to communicate the preliminary ideas for a project and to solicit responses that can help shape those ideas into a clearly defined vision. It's handy. You don't see it very often, but it's a handy tool, especially if you're seeking a new functionality that you haven't seen offered elsewhere. An RFQ is a screening tool used as a prerequisite to respond to a subsequent RFP, request for proposals. The RFQ is best when the functionality is already in use somewhere. And our RFQ can include a checklist of functionalities, showing for each functionality the years of experience offering that product, capacity to deliver within a specified time period and on budget, and as an example where each functionality is in use. Vendors who are, by their response, deemed qualified will then be invited to respond to the RFP. Even with investigative due diligence in advance, a simple invitation to bid won't do. Technology is improving constantly, offering new capabilities or reducing the cost of existing functionality. I recommend use a request for proposals process that's focused on obtaining and maintaining functionality. Also, much of the work involves integrating scheduling and dispatch software and the hardware to function as required. That's another justification to focus on functionality rather than specifying equipment. Should you buy or lease technology? And this little, I forgot where I got this symbol from. You've heard terms such as software for a service, platform for a service, or infrastructure for a service. And RFPs often use to buy functionality using software as a service, and perhaps the hardware as well, where the capabilities are bought through a subscription. The vendor is responsible for installing, maintaining, and updating the software and hardware and training the users. Software as a service can also include training the user to update and replace software and hardware as a cost reduction measure. It should include two necessary provisions, in my view. And the first one is a little difficult to achieve depending on the vendor. The customer must own the data. And the reason for that is the second reason. The data must be transferable should you procure a new software as a service vendor in the future. Your client data especially should be owned. And that way, when they respond to your RFP, they can indicate at the end of the RFP how a transfer would take place. Another advantage of using software as a service is to avoid the hassles of data storage. Technology based on this platform stores data on the cloud. Cloud-based technology customers connect to their databases via the internet, so you don't need a T1 line. You don't need to maintain large servers. You don't need to replace those servers when they fail and equipment does fail. The cloud providers offer a secure infrastructure with identity and access management protocols to restrict viewing to those who need to see the screen, and to allow data manipulation on an individual need-to-know basis. The size of the databases are easy to scale on the cloud. You can grow databases with your number of clients, rights provided, and service area. Got another question for you. Does your service bill agencies for ride? It's only three choices here. A, all your revenues come from appropriations and/or fare box. You don't have to bill agencies. B, you do bill agencies and you bill more than one. Or C, you do bill just one agency. Be interested in your response.
Just a reminder, everyone, the response box, the voting box, is in the participant box, and you can see it. It has a lowercase a. So if you click on that, you'll be able to make your selection.
Okay. With proper cost allocation that has been vetted with funding partners, a transit system can increase ridership, provide more rides within budget, and save those agencies money. Demand response systems ideally should schedule by geography and time, not by funding source. Otherwise, you can imagine a cartoon where vehicles are circulating a neighborhood, one sponsored by a Medicare Advantage program, one by Medicaid, one by ADA Paratransit, and one by the Veterans Administration. Actually, can have a whole fleet because we've recently been informed that there's 130 federal programs subsidizing rides. Imagine that. How are results coming in?
I'll publish them right now. There you go.
Okay. None. Okay. That's nice. We have several that serve more than one agency. For that, in the next screen, I'm going to hone in on cost allocation. But I have three topics on reporting: National Transit Database, cost allocation, and billing and performance targets. You need to make sure in your procurement, in your scope of services, that the technology you want provides the necessary information without having to customize queries. A lot of these software companies have will offer many standard queries for you to choose from. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the National Transit Database that's required if using federal funds. NTD has two data sets, operational and financial. Your scheduling and dispatch software should gather the data to report the operational statistics. The software should include a cost allocation model that enables clients subsidized by different funding sources to share use of a vehicle. So the 8 of you that indicated you bill more than one agency, this is really for you. For all of us, financial sustainability is dependent on vehicle occupancy, more butts and seats. So if you transport clients of a variety of agencies, each ride is assigned to a funder. If the time and odometer is recorded at each stop, then the time or distance between stops can be divided by the number of riders on board and split between funding agencies. The software can then apply a cost per hour or a cost per mile factor or both to the time or mileage accrued. These are both variable indicators, of course. Calculating these variable fees would be the topic for another webinar, regardless of whether you use just a two-variable model focused on time and distance, or add in a third fixed cost factor to aggregate the infrastructure costs that would include rent, leases, technology fees, and management costs. And those that use a three-factor cost allocation model do that for a couple of reasons. One is that your fixed costs do not vary by time or mileage. They vary by the number of supervisors on the street, the number of dispatchers, the size of your facility, the vehicle amortization, if you could go that way. And those don't vary, those are rather solid. They may increase or decrease in steps as you increase or decrease your service area. It's also a tool to have a lower price for off-peak service and to encourage agencies to move business off-peak. The technology package should also produce statistics aimed at agency performance targets, such as boardings per vehicle service hour to assess your scheduling productivity, rides used as a proportion of rides booked to assess systems, policies, and enforcement regarding no-shows and no cancels, reservation as time per ride booked, hold time per call. These are both handy to evaluate call center operations. And the number of unduplicated riders during the time period, along with the average number of rides used per unduplicated client. That shows your success in outreach. Once the procurement specifications have been drafted, you need to do an independent cost estimate, otherwise referred to as an ICE, of the functionalities to be procured. You've got to develop that. It's usually required if using federal funds. And ICE cannot be supplied by a vendor. Got to do independent research. And this is where your intel comes in once again. That's why I encourage you to obtain price sheets from peer agencies that have already procured the functionalities you want. Use their first year costs and current year costs to form the basis of a very solid ICE. Comparing first year and current year costs gives a good base for estimating cost hikes in future years. For budgeting purposes, a local decision-making process may require an ICE that covers a multi-year period. At the same time, one should estimate the impacts of the new technology on revenue and productivity. It's not just cost. Will the additional ridership gained by more efficient scheduling provide a positive return on investment? Can the cost of the technology be recovered during the term of the contract, either due to increased revenue or reduced operating costs? So an ICE can be a positive thing. Got a third question for you. Is your agency involved in your local metropolitan or regional planning organization's coordinated public transit human service effort? And this is just A is yes and B is no. And the reason I'm asking is that MPOs and RPOs are required by the Federal Transportation Authorization, the FAST Act, to produce a locally developed, coordinated public transit human service transportation plan. This plan must have been developed and approved through a process that includes participation by older adults, individuals with disabilities, representatives of public, private, and nonprofit transportation, as well as human service providers and riders. So your transit system needs to be part of that planning process. Again, it's a federal requirement under the FAST Act. The plan begins by identifying transportation gaps faced by older adults and people with disabilities. This plan will establish priorities for funding decisions that is forwarded to the policy committee of the NPO-RPO, and it focuses on improved coordination among transportation providers. So, how many chose A and how many chose B? Okay, well, that's surprising.
The check mark is A. The check mark is yes.
Oh, okay, that's good. A new tool is available to facilitate coordination of rides among different providers. Imagine if only one standard format was available to information and referral agencies such as 211 to identify people in need of rides and describe their mobility needs and funding eligibility. If we had that standard format and record, it could be electronically transmitted to a mobility call center, which would then use that same format to add in the ride requests, the dates, the times, the addresses. By the way, you should always ask for a favorite locations file. The software generally offers that because people do have regular destinations. It makes booking faster. That same record would be electronically transmitted to the ride provider, which would return the data, complete with pickup and arrival times for each ride, as well as the GPS of the destination. And this leads us into an interoperability discussion, because you need that format for interoperability. The format has been researched. Transit Cooperative Research Program Report 210. If you Google TCRP Report 210, you'll see a description of this tool. The name of the full report is Development of Transactional Data Specifications for Demand Response Transportation. This is to do interoperability between providers, including your information and referral. In a situation where you have multiple providers and one may be more able to provide a ride than another, you need partnership agreements. And NADTC, by the way, had a great project in Larimer County, Colorado, where we demonstrated that partnerships do work. The MPO worked with a call center and 4 providers, one for-profit, one taxi, and that was the for-profit. 2 for-profit. Another was a medical transportation provider and 2 volunteer-based providers. Cost allocation we've already discussed, and then this standard data specification is the third leg. Let's go into procurement structure. First item on this list is procurement objectives. You need to know what functionalities are being sought, and so do the vendors who may be interested in providing you with a product. Those offers will need to know about your jurisdiction. What's the land area? What's the population? What is your system's peak bus requirement? Your annual ridership? Your expenses? Your revenue? Your annual service miles and hours? You want to discuss your clientele group, especially if you provide human service agency rides. You want to discuss each agency and their clientele, including their service needs. And it would be helpful, certainly, to have a most recent annual report or possibly monthly reports available for them to look at. Technology vendors need to know the environment of the service area. So not only is it how big the service area is, but how good is the cellular coverage in that service area, or failing that, FM, which is an alternative that will be in an upcoming blog. FM radio, actually. Several transit systems use FM for communications. Is the coverage throughout? Mostly, but with holes, which is fairly common, or little to none. So a general description of the topography may also be relevant, especially for mountain ranges and deep valleys. Deep valleys often are holes. Your next system is, next bullet point was contract boilerplate, your terms and conditions. These are based on your state and local procurement regulations. These include the designation of a project officer overseeing the contract, the payment terms, the length of the contract, including option years, disadvantaged business enterprise requirements, provisions for subcontractors, whether your jurisdiction has a living wage requirement, insurance limits the liability. You've got to have that. Privacy and data protection, HIPAA, who owns the data, and the requirements for personnel background checks. What happens if they have to replace key personnel or subcontractors? Indemnification will vary according to your state law, whether if you require them to indemnify you. So most states would prohibit, Virginia certainly does, a public agency from indemnifying anybody. Audit standards, dispute resolution, and termination for cause or by mutual decision. These are all factors that are very important. And let me just swing through them real quick, because I know I can't write that fast. Here's the project officer, the payment terms, the contract term, length of the contract, DBE requirements, provision for subcontractors, whether you have a living wage rule, your limits of liability for insurance, HIPAA, who owns the data, personnel background checks, replacement of key personnel and subcontractors, indemnification, audit standards, dispute resolution, and termination for cause. A pre-proposal conference should be required. Doesn't have to be. There should be a minimum of 2 weeks between advertising your RFP, and yes, they do have to be advertised, and the pre-proposal conference. In that RFP, you list the pre-proposal conference date, the question deadline date, which could be a week later, not sooner than that. Assume you'll always have an amendment, an addendum. So addendum 1 would be likely 2 weeks after receiving questions, because not only do you need to answer the questions, you often need to vet them within your agency. The due date for proposals, my preference is 3 weeks after issuance of the final, certainly after issuance of the first addendum. If there's more than one addendum, you may have to postpone it. The award and notice to proceed, anticipated date, depending on your agency's approval level and procedures, could be 3 to 6 weeks after receiving the proposals. And the contract commencement date. Well, here's another factor you might want to ask in your RFP. What's the lead time that the offeror needs? I want to add one other factor. In the RFP, you should be asking for the contractor's milestones to include testing, especially if there's integration with different software suppliers. They should give you milestones for testing, training your staff, running dual, and running live. So I'll go over that again from memory, since I didn't write this part down. You need milestones for testing, functionality, well, installing, I should mention that, testing, training. You always want to run dual with your current system if you've got one, just because you want to compare performance. You may end up tweaking some of the parameters within the new software as a result, and then going live. The guts of the business proposal is the offer's completion of the RFP's price sheet. A well-structured price sheet, which can be also provided with an electronic spreadsheet, will enable the agency to project costs over the contract term without reference to the option years. Most states won't let you evaluate price based on option years, and most states don't allow that. The structure of the price sheets depended on the functionalities in the scope, separating the cost of each overall functionality. So you may want a separate price for telephonics, booking and scheduling, dispatch, maintaining a website, even though these are all interdependent. You may want to identify which of the functionalities are optional in case the prices come in higher than what you expect. So again, you want categories for telephonics, booking and scheduling, dispatch, maintaining the website, and maybe a few others. If your procurement includes a call center, then your price sheet should have a fixed line item to cover rent, supplies, and overhead, as well as a variable line item to cover labor. I just like separating fixed costs from variable. Each broad functionality should have a line item to cover license fees, as well as the provision of hardware, software, and communications. And again, the call center, ride booking, and scheduling technology should be separate from the dispatch and customer service technology. By separating these line items, spotting a lowball proposal becomes so much easier. I've already mentioned milestones. You've got to have milestones proposed by the vendor. When you get to the negotiation phase, you can negotiate those dates. And so whatever they propose doesn't have to be final. But you can negotiate that and list it in your memorandum of negotiations. The final piece, and it's very important and it's usually forgotten, is a transition plan. What would happen if a new contractor came on board at the expiration of this contract? How would the data be transitioned to new software? How will call center operations be transferred? Advertising and confidentiality. Oh, so important. So often forgotten. Mailed notices, advertising is key. Sorry for saying a paper on the line. Mailed notices are often ignored. I found it's better to use a print or online venue to advertise a procurement. An email to likely vendors with an online link to the procurement and directions of how to register in your procurement database is also common, but it has to be done in combination with an advertisement. However, until the RFP is released to potential offers, this document has to be kept confidential. You can't circulate draft RFPs because that could give a vendor an unfair advantage. So there are online email newsletters that we all see, such as Transit Intelligence. That's where we often see RFPs advertised. You can still do it in print in trade magazines as well. That may vary, again, by state. Look at your state procurement rules to see if they allow just advertisement online. Excuse me. A selection advisory committee, SAC, is the usual forum to evaluate proposals. Some SACs have a subcommittee to evaluate the technical proposal that includes personnel with operations personnel, maintenance, and service monitoring and evaluation expertise. Some SACs have a second subcommittee to evaluate the business proposals that include agency personnel with a financial perspective. Regardless of the SAC structure, all members sign a non-disclosure agreement before being notified of which offers submitted proposals and before receiving the technical proposals from the purchasing officer. SAC members promise to avoid discussion of the procurement with anyone who isn't on the SAC or the SAC subcommittees. It's got to be kept confidential because you don't want a protest. Now I've got a question on a completely different subject. How good is your cellular penetration in your service area? And so again, two choices. You have A, good high-speed internet pretty much throughout, maybe with a few holes, or B, lousy, dial-up, major unserved stretches. So if you go to the appropriate box and go with A or B, that would be great. I'm aware of two venues for communicating with vehicles, cellular and FM. FM is old school, I recognize. Boston MBTA does FM. Where I used to work, Arlington Transit was on FM. Satellite could be a third except for the expense, so I haven't seen it used yet. Cellular has a clear advantage in urbanized areas with plenty of coverage and repeaters to handle urban canyons and other spots that would otherwise not have reception. Urban cellular coverage and processing speeds are improving. Cellular also requires minimal equipment on the vehicle, just a tablet or a cell phone. Definite advantages if you have good cellular reception to use cellular. But I bring up FM because in rural areas, cellular reception and cell towers tend to be along major highways. The further away from the roadway, the less reception. Some carriers have better coverage in rural areas than others, and I'm hearing that AT&T, US Cellular, and Verizon are superior. But the dead spots in much of rural America are huge. Several ideas have been proposed to include rural coverage, including high-altitude balloons, but we haven't seen them funded yet. FM is an alternative. It can work because the coverage is bigger, but there's more investment on the vehicles. Each vehicle would need a separate antenna connected to an onboard router in addition to the tablet or whatever. So again, the additional setup costs are higher than it would be for cellular. How are our responses coming for question 4?
I will publish them right now.
Good. Also, well, three have a bad experience, but 9 have a good experience, okay? Let me go into, for those who have a bad experience, I'm assuming you're probably rural. A little more detail, FM radio in the 30 to 1,000 megahertz range would be the alternative. Twin trunked, you'd lease twin trunk dedicated FM channels for voice and data communications. FM signals can be received up to 100 miles away depending on the topography and the power to the transmitter. Like cellular, it works better in a flat area, or if the radio tower is on top of a mountain, and because the range increases with tower height. The data rate on FM is about 4,600 bits per second. So you can use it to transmit the time and GPS stamps. You can use it to transmit text, but FM will not stream onboard video. For those, FM would be polling about every minute. Cellular can poll more often. For those who intend to investigate FM, your first question is whether a frequency or two are available. Your local fire department would likely use FM and would know where the towers are. The Bureau of Land Management of the Department of Interior also would have this information. They can also refer you to organizations that would have available channels. So it really is an option that's open. Sorry for the... Anyway, do we have chat questions? I read a little fast,
yes.
I think.
Yes, no, we have some. Thank you so much. I just want to really quickly remind people how they can ask their questions. You can type your questions in the chat box, which we do have a couple. And you can also email your questions, and I have received a couple there as well. So the email questions would go to mclaughlin@mclaughlin@gmail.com, which is the same email address that you received the connection information from. So you can just reply to that if you want to submit a question that way. But yes, so we do have some questions, and we'll start with the questions in the chat section. And so the first one is, do you have an example of a good pricing sheet?
I can post one that I used in the procurement. Let me. I have to find it, but I can post. Yeah, I'll find one to post for you.
Awesome. You can send that in, and we'll put it with the recorded webinar when it goes up on the website.
Okay.
Awesome. So the next question is similar, but it is, do you have any procurement templates that might be provided?
Well, again, your RFP includes a lot of boilerplate as well as a scope. I think I've sort of provided a template, and I can give you a template based on this webinar of what should be included in the scope. It's sort of like bullet points to consider. You'd have to put it together because the functionalities you may need and can afford, it can differ from agency to agency. I can also list out what I've read as far as what should be included in the boilerplate for example, limit liability. But your procurement rules vary by state and locality, and you really do need to consult your local certified purchasing CPM, certified purchasing manager, because it will vary by state. Some states, for example, will only let you procure for 5 years, and they may or may not give you limits on option years. Some states may let you do a 10-year procurement, so there's a lot that varies.
So the next question came in by email, and it's, do you recommend getting sample RFPs from other transit agencies, and if so, how do we go about doing that?
Find agencies that have the technology you'd like. There are RFPs are public information. They may, if they've had it for a few years, it may not be easily accessible, but the agency should be able to email it to you. That's why it's so important to go to these state transit associations to do your intel. Nothing better than personal contact. If you know some vendors that you're really interested in, they can provide contacts to get you the RFP and the price sheets as well.
Very good, thank you. So the next question is from the chat, and it is, are there systems that provide the ability to share databases with transit agencies at multiple regional locations to increase coordination and efficiency?
Echo Lane, I think, is doing that in Pennsylvania because they have a state contract. And several of them allow multiple providers. Again, I mentioned the Larimer County example was using a version, not the full version, but a preliminary version of Route Match. So there's several call centers that book rides and parcel rides out to a variety of providers. Of course, your non-emergency medical, the brokerage model and NEMT, non-emergency Medicaid transportation, is built on that. So these providers in general should be able to do that. You've set the work rules. For example, if you have one provider who only serves the northwest portion of the county, you can using trapeze talk, you can draw a polygon for their vehicles and assign their vehicles only within that sub-area. In your software, you'll also, you have to develop a vehicle file of all the vehicles available to provide rides. Who owns the vehicle, whether they're accessible, how many seats, how many wheelchair positions, and so on. All that is used by the software vendors to assign rides. So multiple providers is not a problem. The cost allocation is necessary that you can have riders of multiple funding sources on board the same vehicle. That has been done. It's often done in rural areas. It's not done often enough in urban and suburban areas, but it's doable. I came from an agency that did it back in the early 90s.
Awesome. All right, thank you. So the next question is there a list of software vendors that are most popular or most frequently used?
If you advertise your procurement on the email websites, whether it's Mass Transit Magazine or Intelligent, and there's several of them out there, they all read them. They're all looking for business. I don't know that there's a list. I know there's one company that used to have, and they still have 80% of the business that may have declined, but because the competition's increased heavily. But I don't know who assesses the percent of business each one has.
Yeah, I don't think there's a list out there. We all sort of know the big names, right? But I don't think there's actually been anybody that produced a list. So, but yeah.
And I wouldn't rely on it necessarily, because you want to figure out what functionalities you need and then price and see how much other agencies have paid for them to see what you can afford before going out and just assuming that we've got to go with brand A or brand B. And the reason I'm saying that is the technology is changing constantly. That's why, for example, Trapeze has a convention every year and issues an upgrade every year, which is numbered by the year, because everybody's constantly upgrading their product and sharing it among their customers. Some of them do it for free, some of them charge for it. But we really are in revolution. The technology is amazing.
Absolutely. So we had a comment. This is not a question, but a comment in the chat box that says that in response to Mr. Bradshaw's question about shared databases, they don't have a shared database that allows for communication across providers. However, a mobility manager for one of the organizations that oversees regional medical transportation is able to navigate between each participating agency's database to coordinate services. So that's another option. There's an option of sharing databases. So.
I should have asked if anybody's uses volunteer providers, because there's a couple of software software alternatives out there that will enable, for example, there's one in Northern Virginia, the Connect a Ride, uses a software base that's accessed by Shepherd Center and other religious-based organizations. And they can use that to swap rides between churches. I can't handle this ride, can you?
Right.
So there's a lot of options out there.
Fantastic. Well, I don't see any other questions. I'm going to check real quick on my email to make sure I didn't miss anything. I don't see anything. Steve, do you have any? It's actually perfect timing. It's worked out really well. Do you have any closing comments for us?
It's wonderful to be in an industry that's in revolution. I want to leave one other thought, especially for those agencies that both do demand response and fixed route. Excuse me. We're morphing as an industry towards intermodal link trips, where I mean, you see it in Pinellas County, Florida, for example, works with Uber and other providers in a suburban/rural, not a densely populated area, to bring people to transit stops where they can transfer. You see microtransit, which has done very well in Denver. They've been doing it for many years. They used to call it Call and Ride. They recently changed it. Where they have a contractor that circulates in a geofenced area based on demand, will pick you up in front of your building and take you to the light rail station. That's the bulk of their business. Some of those zones also take people to the grocery pharmacy. Our technology is still evolving. So like Denver, they take you to the light rail station and they do it to minimize transit travel time because they know what the train schedule is. Those agencies that take people to bus stops, it's not so sophisticated yet. That's why we need GTFS Flex to link with fixed route GTFS. So you're going to see over the next few years an improvement in that capacity for intermodal link trips where people don't have to wait more than a few minutes to transfer to vehicles. That enables a transit agency to put more resources on heavily used fixed routes to have more frequent service and to build transit hubs to make transferring easy and convenient and you stay dry. So it's lots of possibilities are coming in the future. Of course, you got to be able to have a common platform to pay for the ride. And that's and that's, you know, by the way, LA has a city ride, I think it's called Card, where they, it's for older adults in Los Angeles. It's done by the city where they add a subsidy every month. And they can use it on whichever vendor they need to use it with. Let the rider choose. Similar to the WIC and SNAP concept for food stamps. So perhaps that's an idea that'll catch on.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for all the really incredible information. Thank you to everybody that participated today. We really appreciate your time. I'm going to be emailing to all of the people that registered for today the session evaluation. If you could take a moment to complete that, we would really appreciate it. We use that information to improve future sessions. I'll get that out in just a little while, a little later this afternoon. But thank you so much. We appreciate your time and your participation today. Please stay in contact with the NADTC. You can do that via the website or Twitter or Facebook. If you're not on the e-news, I strongly suggest that you sign up for that so that you can be notified of future training and technical assistance activities, as well as resources and funding opportunities and everything else that the NADTC makes available. So thank you everyone very much, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks everybody.